Now, the Home Secretary has accused some migrants of, and I quote her, taking advantage of our laws, as she says that the Home Office will appeal the decision to temporarily block the deportation of an Eritrean man to France under the government's one-in, one-out migration scheme. Well, Shabana Mahmood said that the last-minute legal claims, including unexpected allegations of modern slavery, make a mockery of this country's generosity. And joining us to talk about this is Calgie, who's the political correspondent at The Express, and immigration barrister and visiting professor at Southampton Law School, Dr. S. Chelvan. Dr. Chelvan, I'd like to start with you. Let's just give this quote in full from the Home Secretary. Migrants suddenly deciding that they are a modern slave on the very eve of their removal from this country, having never made such a claim before, make a mockery of our laws and this country's generosity. Why is she wrong?
No, any claim which is vexatious, it means it's false, it has no merit, should clearly be kicked out by the British courts. And that's what's so important about this case of the Eritrean national. Mr Justice Sheldon, in providing that stay for 14 days, is clearly saying that there's got to be evidence of medical and expert evidence in relation to whether this individual is a victim of trafficking.
It's a bit late to raise it,
No, it's not, because the Home Office have a duty, a legal duty, to ensure that they identify victims of trafficking or modern slavery. In this case, in 2023, he came through Libya. Libya is a known trafficking route. So the Home Office itself should have picked up this case. And that's a problem with the UK-France treaty, that a lot of individuals have been wrongly identified. Your viewers may be frightened to know that children have been identified as initially going through this scheme. So there's lots of problems in relation to that, but importantly, these are not last-minute claims. People have rights to legal representation, and this is there's a decision by a British judge in a British court.
What do you say to those, and there'll be many of them watching now, who say, I voted to be led by a politician, not to be led by judges. And we have a government policy which is consistently being frustrated by judges.
No, it's not, because what happens is that we have something called the rule of law. We have politicians in Westminster, we have the government, and we have independent judges. That's what makes us a democracy, that we have our checks and balances. Otherwise, we're in an authoritarian state, by an autocrat. So it's very important that we have these checks and balances. And importantly, what we need to do is burst a bubble in the hate and fear which is being created by putting the labels of illegal and criminal to refugees. This has only happened since June 2022 with Section 40 of the Nationality and Borders Act. What the Home Secretary needs to do is repeal that piece of law, so therefore we're going back to the issues of looking at genuine refugees.
OK.
Because we've got a proud tradition of providing refugees with sanctuary.
Calgie, political correspondent with The Express. Thank goodness we live in a country where you don't just get plucked, as we've seen in America, from your home and sent somewhere as a sort of punishment for daring to seek asylum here.
Well, look, I believe in the rule of law, and we hear very articulate explanation of what the law is. I think my position and the position of most Britons will be that the law is demonstrably wrong and needs to be changed. And whilst I agree with Shabana Mahmood's words, and it's not very often you hear me agreeing with the words of a Labour minister, what my issue is that Labour came to power essentially believing that they didn't need to change the laws and they didn't need to change the treaties. And that has been proved completely false. And we need to change the law, we need to change the treaties.
What would you change when it comes to the law? Because if we are a democratic and compassionate society which looks after people who are victims of trafficking, what do we change?
We need a law that recognises that France is not a third world country that doesn't respect human rights. We need a law that allows us to acknowledge that the current treaties, the ECHR, the UN Asylum and Refugee Convention, the European Convention on Modern Trafficking, were designed in completely different times, basically after the war, to deal with the fallout of that, not recognising that air travel would become so cheap, that people smugglers would be able to advertise on TikTok and other social media platforms. That's the world we now live in.
So if we're dealing with trafficking in particular, because that's the basis of this claim, would you say we need to change the law so that if someone is a victim of trafficking, we send them to France and France looks after them for us?
Well, we certainly should be recognising that France is a perfectly safe country.
But we do recognise that France is a safe country. So what happens is there's a threshold. It's called Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which says that nobody should suffer torture or inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. But importantly, what Christian ignores is that if we get rid of these treaties, 2005 was the trafficking convention, so it's not after the war, it's not a historic case, and these are living instruments.
Yes.
But importantly, you've got English law. So if you get rid of the international treaties, you've got common law. So you've got in 1470, you have Sir John Fortescue saying torture is against the common law. You have the Bill of Rights in 1689. There's an English law which will come and step in. So you get rid of those international treaties.
So if you get rid of the ECHR, or we get out of the convention...
You'll still have the protection.
Right.
And that's very important. That's what these right-wing scaremongers in relation to getting rid of refugees are all about.
Christian,
we have English law and English protection.
Would you support the baseline proposal that comes from parties like Reform, and it is being discussed by the Conservative Party as well, that we simply don't allow anybody to stay here if they arrive illegally?
Yeah, I think that has to be the case, because otherwise you have such an incentive for these people smugglers. You have to be completely hardline about this. You have to remove everyone, and you have to block them coming across in the first place.
And that's why you get safe and legal routes.
And I want the British people to be put first, because I think for too long the political establishment has prioritised asylum seekers and, the sort of circles, I'm afraid, that you move in. And let's also remember that many of these refugee charities that prevent us from deporting people are funded by taxpayers in the first place. So I also want to get rid of that and have everyone on an equal footing.
But what's important is that safe and legal route. So we get rid of the criminal gangs. How do we get rid of the criminal gangs? Open up a registration centre in northern France to enable individuals to register their claim, and then they can lawfully come to the UK to be able to have their claim processed.
So you
get rid of the criminal gangs.
We don't seem to be able to get rid of the criminal gangs.
Yes, we can.
We've been saying that we will for years now, and they're still operating with impunity.
But, Richard, that's what we do. We get rid of the supply and demand. We ensure that people can lawfully register their claim in northern France and be able to come through. Now, importantly, in relation to the whole issue about France being a safe country, we know there's this issue of destitution. If you don't have a home, if you don't have food, if you don't have water, that's also a risk. So France may not be a safe country because the way refugees are treated in France.
But this is exactly why they're coming across the channel. It's exactly why what French politicians point to. We are so much more generous when it comes to asylum seekers.
The statistics don't support that. The figures do not support that.
In fact, it's a larger pull factor than the fact they speak English or the fact they may even have
we
families.
know that there's a larger number of refugee applicants in France than there is coming across the channel. That's very important to be able to understand.
There are about 120 million displaced people. Right.
Not in northern France. It usually sub-Saharan Africa.
On the planet, there are 120 million displaced people. How many tens of millions of those would like to come to Britain? You open a safe Britain and say...
And that is the fear-mongering the right-wing provide in relation to the debate. To be able to say 120 million are not coming to the UK.
Well, our allocation of minutes has run out, I'm afraid.
Yes,
so thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed. Let us know what you think. Very strong debate and... politically, probably one of the biggest issues facing voters at the moment.
No question.